I married my boss just for the job, but he stole my heart. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My boss husband squeezed my hand under the boardroom table and whispered, "Don't react." That was the moment I knew my fake marriage was about to become public entertainment. 10 people sat across from us in Crossvale's glass boardroom, pretending to study quarterly projections, while absolutely everyone stared at my ring. It was a simple band, platinum, clean, expensive in the way that doesn't apologize. I still wasn't used to the weight of it. 3 weeks earlier, I was a project coordinator fighting with insurance over my mom's infusion treatments and praying payroll hit before rent cleared. Now I was sitting beside Julian Cross, the CEO, my boss, the man people called the knife in a tailored suit, while a board member asked why the company had not disclosed a material relationship affecting executive governance. Because the material relationship was me. I kept my face still, just like Julian told me. My pulse was loud enough to hear. I had agreed to a temporary marriage because I needed my job, my health insurance, and enough stability to keep my mother out of a county ward. He needed a married image before a hostile confidence vote tied to a merger. It was supposed to be paperwork, appearances, and 6 months of breathing room. It was never supposed to feel personal. Vanessa Hale, our COO, folded her hands and smiled like she was watching a match she already rigged. "Ava," she said sweetly, "since you're here, perhaps you can explain when this began." Julian cut in. "Questions for governance counsel go through legal." Theo, our in-house counsel, didn't look up from his notes. And they will. I should have felt protected. Instead, I felt exposed, because Julian's thumb brushed once against my knuckle under the table, a tiny steadying touch that made my throat burn for reasons I did not have time to examine. I took this deal to save my life, and now it could ruin it in public. My phone buzzed with the revised agenda, and line 3 listed my name. Then Vanessa opened a folder labeled Executive Spousal Risk. Before the ring and the headlines and the boardroom whispers, my life was fluorescent lights and calendar invites. I managed implementation timelines for Crossvale, a logistics software company that liked to call itself disruptive, while quietly running on underpaid people like me. I was good at my job because I noticed everything: duplicate invoices, impossible deadlines, clients who said small issue right before a disaster. I stayed late, answered weekend messages, and kept a spreadsheet of my mom's medications in the same folder as vendor contracts because my brain had become one giant emergency tab. Mom's treatments weren't fully covered. Every month, there was a new non-formulary surprise. I took extra freelance scheduling work at night and slept 4 hours if I was lucky. Losing my job didn't mean tight budget. It meant missed infusions. Julian Cross existed 3 floors above me like weather. Everyone adjusted around him. He was precise, fast, and impossible to read. If he nodded at your presentation, people talked about it for days. If he asked, "Is this final?" in that calm voice, someone usually cried in the bathroom after. My humiliating moment happened on a Tuesday at 8:12 a.m. We were in a leadership prep meeting because my director called out sick and shoved me in with the deck. Slide 17 had a vendor timeline mismatch I'd flagged the night before. I explained the risk and said we needed 48 hours to verify the numbers before promising the client. Julian looked at the slide, then at me. "Do you often confuse caution with leadership, Ms. Morales?" The room went silent. I said, "No. I confuse unverified numbers with future lawsuits." A couple people stared at the table. Vanessa smiled without looking at me. Julian's mouth tightened like he was annoyed I answered it all. "Then verify faster." After the meeting, Mari met me in the break room and handed me coffee. "Tell me you spit in his sparkling water." "I can't afford that kind of self-respect," I said. I had no idea he was about to offer me something worse. The proposal happened the same day rumors started about a special board session. By lunch, Slack channels were full of fake confidence. Just merger timing. Routine governance review. Normal. Nobody believes normal when executives start disappearing into conference rooms with legal. At 6:40 p.m., after most of my floor cleared out, Julian's assistant pinged me. "CEO requests 10 minutes. I assumed I was getting blamed for something expensive. His office was all glass, steel, and a city view I could never afford to enjoy. He didn't ask me to sit right away. He stood by the window, sleeves rolled once, tie loosened, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. I need discretion, he said. About work? About a personal matter that affects the company. That was my first signal to leave. I didn't. He finally faced me. There is a board faction attempting to force an accelerated governance vote before the merger closes. One of their arguments is executive instability. I waited. Okay. I need to appear married before the vote. I actually laughed. Once. Sharp and ugly. You called me up here to make a joke? I don't joke at work. Then you need a therapist, not an employee. His jaw flexed, but he didn't react. I need someone intelligent, discreet, and not connected to the board families. Someone whose background can survive scrutiny. And your list stopped at me? My list started with you. I stood so fast my chair scraped. Absolutely not. Then he said the part that made me stay. I know your insurance appeal for your mother was denied last month. HR routed the escalation through executive authorization because of plan limits. I approved the exception personally. I went cold. You looked at my file? I saw what legal placed in front of me. I am offering a contract, not coercion. 6 months. Separate living arrangements inside one residence. Financial compensation. Full medical coverage rider for your mother. A clean exit clause. You may decline. I hated that he sounded sincere. I hated more that my first thought was whether the rider would cover infusion transport. Then he slid the draft term sheet toward me, and one line changed everything. The line was simple. Independent counsel for Ms. Morales, paid by Crossvale, selected by Ms. Morales. That's why I didn't walk out. Predators don't usually insist you bring your own lawyer. By noon, I was in a conference room with Theo Kim, our in-house counsel, and an outside attorney from a small employment firm Mari found through her cousin. Theo handled company exposure. My lawyer handled me. Julian sat at the far end and spoke like we were negotiating a vendor contract, not a marriage. Term is 6 months, Theo said. Either party may terminate early under listed conditions. Separate bedrooms, my lawyer added. Julian nodded. Non-negotiable. I almost rolled my eyes at that. We set boundaries in exhausting detail. No romantic obligations, no pressure to leave my role, no retaliation if I ended the agreement, media statements pre-approved by both parties, and a strict confidentiality clause that excluded illegal conduct. That clause mattered to me. I made sure it was in plain English. And compensation? My lawyer asked. Julian answered without blinking. A temporary salary adjustment to reflect reputational risk and public-facing duties. Medical rider effective immediately. Housing stipend if she chooses not to reside with me. Theo interjected. Residence is recommended for optics. Recommended, I repeated. Not required. Julian looked at me. You may choose. That tiny sentence hit me harder than the money. I signed because my mom's next treatment was in 9 days and the estimate in my inbox was $6,842 after insurance. I signed because my landlord had posted a late notice that morning. I signed because survival makes your morals feel less like a mountain and more like a hallway full of bad doors. 3 days later, we stood in a courthouse annex with 2 witnesses and a clerk who didn't care that half the city's business pages would care by sunset. I wore a navy dress from Mari's closet. Julian wore a charcoal suit and looked like he was announcing layoffs. The clerk said, "Do you both enter this marriage willingly?" I said yes before I could think too hard. Outside, Theo handed us a folder and murmured, "Press statement goes live in 10. Then the first camera flash hit before I reached his car. If you've never watched office gossip mutate in real time, imagine being set on fire in a room full of people holding notebooks. By 9:15 the next morning, there were photos of us leaving the courthouse on 2 local business blogs, one finance account on X, and a Reddit thread titled CO Marries Employee Before Merger Vote, with 300 comments and exactly 0 facts. Someone zoomed in on my shoes and called me a gold digger because they were scuffed. At work, conversations stopped when I passed. HR sent a neutral email about professional conduct and anti-harassment expectations, which, translated, meant, please be weird quietly. Mari cornered me in the stairwell. Tell me this is a tax thing. It's temporary, I said. That is not a tax thing. It's a contract. She stared at me so hard I felt 12 years old. Ava, contracts can still wreck you. I know. Do you? I wanted to say yes. Instead I said, Mom's treatment got approved this morning. Mari's expression broke. She swore under her breath and pulled me into a fast hug. I hate that this is what it took. Vanessa waited until the afternoon leadership check-in to strike. In front of 8 people, she glanced at my revised timeline deck and said, "Impressive how quickly some careers accelerate with the right sponsorship." Nobody laughed. That made it worse. I kept my voice level. The timeline reflects vendor commitments and signed amendments sent at 11:03 a.m. I can forward them. Julian, seated at the head of the table, didn't defend me. He only said, "Proceed." I hated him for that for exactly 3 hours. Then at 7:40 p.m., after I found Mrs. Cross written in dry erase on my cubicle wall, security emailed that camera footage was being preserved at executive request. No announcement. No speech. Just action. When I got to the penthouse that night, still surreal, still temporary, Julian was in the kitchen reading a board packet. "Did you order the footage?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Yes." "Why didn't you say anything in the meeting?" He set the packet down and finally met my eyes. "Because Vanessa wanted you emotional on record." That answer should have calmed me, but his next sentence did the opposite. "Also," Julian said, "you shouldn't use your employee login from home tonight." I froze in his kitchen holding a takeout bag and a cheap pharmacy candle Mari insisted would make the penthouse feel less like a museum. Why? Because someone attempted to access your permissions at 6:12 p.m. from conference room 31B. My first instinct was anger. "You monitored my account?" "I monitor unusual activity tied to active merger workstreams." Theo flagged it. The penthouse was enormous and somehow quieter than my apartment had ever been. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A dining table no one used. 2 bedrooms at opposite ends of a hallway like a peace treaty in architecture. We had rules taped, metaphorically, to every surface, and yet standing there in my friend's borrowed socks while my fake husband told me someone at his company might be using my credentials felt more intimate than the courthouse. "Do you know who did it?" I asked. "Not yet." He moved around the island and set a folder beside my food. Inside were printed screenshots, login attempts, timestamps, badge access to 31B, and a note from Theo. 6:11 p.m. Badge scan registered to a facilities supervisor. 6:13 p.m. Manual override. 6:14 p.m. Failed export attempt under my username. That wasn't random. "You printed this for me. I assumed you'd want to read it yourself." Something in me softened before I could stop it. Later, we did the world's most awkward domestic routine. He took calls in his study while I reheated soup and updated a vendor tracker at the kitchen counter. At 11:20, I found a heating pad and a bottle of electrolyte packets left outside my room with no note. I'd complained once, days earlier, about tension headaches after hospital nights. The next morning, he was cold again in the elevator, all CEO angles and silence. But I started noticing things. The way he rubbed his sternum when he thought no one was looking. The way he skipped lunch and pretended coffee counted. The way Vanessa watched us in meetings, not like a gossip, but like someone checking whether a lock had shifted. Then I opened my calendar and saw a meeting I never scheduled. The meeting invite was titled Vendor Reconciliation Follow-Up, set for 7 a.m. and sent from my account to a supplier I'd never worked with, Halbert Facilities Group. I deleted it, checked sent, and found 2 more drafts I didn't create. Same vendor, same language, same fake polished tone. My stomach dropped. I took screenshots, exported headers, and walked straight to Theo instead of Julian. Theo shut his office door, scanned the printouts, and said, "Good. You documented before confronting anyone." Confronting who? That depends on who expected you not to notice. He pulled access logs I wasn't supposed to see and highlighted 3 entries. My account had been probed twice after hours. Both times, conference rooms near finance. Both times, calendar metadata altered from an internal admin terminal. "This isn't teenage snooping," he said. "This is someone building a paper trail." For what? Possibly procurement irregularities. Possibly something worse. I thought about Vanessa's comment in the meeting and felt a sick, hot pulse of humiliation. They're setting me up? Theo didn't answer directly. They're testing whether your credentials can move without noise. That afternoon, I interviewed an ex-assistant without meaning to. I went downstairs for coffee and ran into Priya, who used to support Vanessa before restructuring. She laughed when she saw my face. "You look like I did before I quit." "Bad sleep," I said. "Try bad conscience. Don't trust after-hours invoice requests from ops." She lowered her voice. Vanessa had me reissue vendor approvals with changed account numbers 3 times last year. Always urgent. Always Julian already signed off. He hadn't. Did you report it? To who? Vanessa signed my reviews. Before I could ask more, she glanced over my shoulder and went pale. Vanessa was across the lobby speaking to 2 board consultants, smiling, one hand on a folder embossed with merger docs. That night, Julian found me at the kitchen island comparing invoice PDFs and bank routing numbers. You're working on restricted files, he said. So are whoever keeps borrowing my name. For the first time, Julian looked scared of what I'd found. The first thing I proved wasn't who was behind it. It was what they were doing. Crossveil was paying inflated facility stabilization, invoices through Halberd and 2 smaller vendors tied to emergency retrofit work in data centers we didn't even own. The amounts were just small enough to avoid automatic board review. $48, $700, $49,200, $47,980, stacked across departments and approved under compressed deadlines. Old trick, new suit. I built a spreadsheet at 1:30 a.m. on Julian's dining table while he paced on a call with outside auditors. Dates, invoice numbers, routing changes, approval chains. If you line them up against merger milestones, the pattern was obvious. Cash bleeding out in the 60 days before the confidence vote. Julian ended the call and stared at my screen. How many? Confirmed? $612,340 over 9 weeks. Suspected more. He sat down slowly. Show me the approvals. I pointed to the signatures and digital authorizations. Some are forged. Some are real but attached to altered supporting docs. And these, I tapped 3 entries, were routed under my credentials after hours. If this blows before we prove source, it looks like you married a coordinator who siphoned funds. He didn't deny it. Yes. The honesty made me angrier than excuses would have. So that's why me? I asked. Because I'm useful camouflage? His voice turned flat. No. Then explain the merger timing, the marriage, the attacks, and my login being used. I can explain part of it. Not all of it yet. I laughed once exhausted. That is not comforting. At work the next day, Vanessa stopped by my desk with a silk-smooth smile. I'm hosting a small donor gala next week. Spouses are expected. Try not to disappear early this time. Ava, optics matter. The word optics hit differently now. After she left, I checked the shared drive and found a folder permission changed at 9:14 a.m. A folder containing board vote proxies and executive trust documents. Only 5 people had access. Julian, Vanessa, Theo, 1 board secretary, and, because of a scheduling integration I'd built months ago, me. My fake marriage wasn't just a PR shield anymore. It was sitting on top of a trap with my name on it. The emotional shift didn't happen in a cinematic way. No rain, no dramatic confession, no accidental handbrush over a candle. It happened at 12:47 a.m. in the penthouse kitchen while I was eating cereal from a mug and Julian was standing at the sink in rolled sleeves, looking like a man trying not to crack in private. He asked, "How bad is your mother's pain on infusion days?" I almost lied out of habit. "Manageable." He turned, leaned back against the counter, and said quietly, "That means bad." I hated how seen I felt. "Why are you asking?" "Because you fall asleep in chairs at the hospital and still catch errors my directors miss." "That sounds like praise. Are you ill?" He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Then he pressed 2 fingers to his sternum and closed his eyes for a second. I stepped forward without thinking. "Julian, stress. I'm fine." "You are absolutely not fine." He sat, and for once he didn't argue when I handed him water and made him eat half my dry cereal like he was a stubborn teenager. The city lights made everything look unreal. He looked older than 38 in that moment, not in face, but in weight. "I didn't choose you because you were vulnerable," he said finally. "I chose you because you don't lie when the truth is inconvenient." I kept my voice careful. That is a very specific compliment from a CEO. Most people in my position are surrounded by performance. And I'm not performing. His eyes held mine. "You are surviving. There's a difference." That should have made me feel safer. Instead, it made my chest hurt. Then he admitted something real but incomplete. A board faction was preparing a misconduct narrative tied to executive judgment and internal control failures. They needed him to look reckless before the merger vote. The marriage bought time and stabilized 2 swing votes from old-school directors who were spooked by scandal rumors. He said nothing about why the rumors started or what else he was hiding. When I went to bed, I stood in my doorway too long, listening to him moving around the apartment like a stranger I was starting to miss before I even knew him. The next morning, I found a document that made every soft feeling feel dangerous. Theo had sent a contract amendment for my review, and buried in the legal attachments was a draft crisis memo marked Contingency Communications, Employee Spousal Exposure. I opened it on my lunch break in an empty conference room and felt my face go hot. The memo outlined response options if procurement irregularities are tied to Ms. Morales' credentials. It included a line about temporary administrative leave pending investigation and a recommendation to separate CEO from operational knowledge of spouse's day-to-day actions. There was even a media Q&A draft about conflict of interest safeguards. I read it 3 times because my brain refused to process what looked obvious. They had a script ready in case I became the fall girl. I marched to Julian's office without knocking. He looked up from a call. "Give me a minute." I threw the printed memo on his desk. "No." He ended the call immediately. "Where did you get this?" "In the attachments your legal team sent me." "Very efficient, by the way. You marry me, move me into your penthouse, and then prepare a statement about putting me on leave when finance crimes surface under my login?" His face changed, but not into guilt, into alarm. "That was never approved. That is not a denial." "Ava." "No. I need one answer without strategy. Did you know there was a contingency plan with my name on it?" He was silent for 1 second too long. That was enough. I laughed because crying in his office would have humiliated me more. "Right. Got it." He stood as I backed away from the desk. "Listen to me. Drafting exposure scenarios is standard legal protocol when there is targeted misconduct. Then maybe you should have mentioned I was one of the scenarios. I was trying to confirm the source before I frightened you. Congratulations. You managed the fear part terribly." I left before he could say anything else and spent an hour in a parking garage stairwell shaking with rage. Mari called, and I almost told her everything. I didn't. I hated that I still wanted to protect him, even then. At 5:58 p.m., Vanessa stepped into the stairwell in heels that clicked like a countdown. She smiled and said, "I was wondering when you'd finally read the right file." Vanessa leaned against the railing like we were 2 women sharing harmless gossip instead of standing over the ruins of my judgment. "You look upset," she said. "Try the performance review version." She gave a low laugh. "Julian never told you how this works, did he? He builds contingency plans for everyone, including you. Did you come here to defend him?" "No. I came to offer you a way out before legal burns you both." I crossed my arms so she wouldn't see my hands shaking. "Out of what exactly?" "An internal fraud investigation that will very likely attach to your credentials. He married you to stabilize the board and contain optics. If it gets ugly, you become a regrettable lapse in judgment. He survives. You sign an NDA. End of story." It was cruel because it sounded plausible. She slid a card toward me. "If you want counsel not chosen by Julian's ecosystem, call tonight. And Ava? Resign before they suspend you." After she left, I sat on the concrete steps staring at the card until Theo texted, "Need 10 minutes. Urgent. Not by email." I almost ignored him. Then I remembered he was the one person who kept giving me documents before stories. We met in a hospital cafeteria because I was already there with Mom, and my life had become a thriller with bad coffee. Theo looked wrung out. He put a sealed envelope on the table. "Open it after I explain," he said. "The memo you saw is real. So is your anger." I said nothing. "But Vanessa pushed for that language," he continued. "I know because this is the red line history from July 18th, 11:42 p.m. Your name was inserted in her edits before we had any evidence tied to your credentials." I stared at him. Why would she do that before the activity happened? Because she expected the activity. He nodded toward the envelope. Inside were version logs, metadata, and a badge report showing Vanessa's assistant accessing finance copy rooms the same nights my account was probed. Theo's voice dropped. "Julian withheld things from you. I'm not excusing that. But if you resign now, she gets exactly what she planned." I looked at the red-lined phrase, Ms. Morales exposure pathway, and felt my anger sharpen into something useful. Then my phone lit up with a company alert. Emergency board session tomorrow. I didn't forgive Julian before we worked together. That mattered. I met him in Theo's office at 10:15 p.m., exhausted, furious, and done pretending I was just collateral. He stood when I came in, started to apologize, and I put a hand up. Not first, I said. Facts first. So we built a war table. Theo mapped the legal sequence. I mapped the operational anomalies. Julian handled external auditors and a forensic accounting vendor who owed him no loyalty. We pulled access logs, invoice images, calendar headers, badge scans, and printer metadata. Theo obtained a preservation notice so no one could quietly delete version histories. I made a timeline on the whiteboard so simple even a hostile board member could follow it. July 18th memo edit. July 22nd vendor account change. August 3rd after-hours login probe. August 11th altered invoice support. August 19th donor gala budget transfer. Pattern. Escalation. Intent. Julian watched me write, then said quietly, "You should have had all of this from me sooner." "Yes," I said, still writing. "I should have. That was the closest thing to peace we had." The trap came together around Vanessa's own confidence. She was chairing a pre-gala finance presentation in the boardroom, the same event where she planned to position executive control failures before the merger vote. Theo arranged for outside forensic counsel to attend under the pretext of governance review. Julian deliberately let slip that he intended to address spousal conflict concerns first. If Vanessa thought the room would focus on me, she'd walk right into the invoice trail. Mari helped too, in the only way she could. She sat with Mom during treatment and texted me, "Don't fall in love during a felony audit." I nearly laughed for the first time in days. At 1:06 a.m., Theo forwarded the final piece, an audio clip from a compliance hotline voicemail Vanessa assumed was deleted, preserved by backup retention. A vendor rep saying, "Per Ms. Hale's office, use the revised routing and don't copy finance." I stared at the transcript until the words blurred. Julian stepped beside me, not touching me. "Tomorrow will be ugly." I kept my eyes on the screen. "Good." Then he said the one thing I wasn't prepared to hear before battle. "We're not married because you were convenient," Julian said. "You were the only person I trusted not to sell panic." I turned to him, furious that my chest still reacted to his voice. "Save it for after," I said. "If there is an after." The boardroom felt colder than usual. Everyone smelled blood. Donors mingled outside for the kickoff. Vanessa ran with a deck titled Governance Risk and Stabilization. She opened with concern, not accusation, classic Vanessa. "Recent events," she said, glancing at me without using my name, "have created perception challenges that could affect merger confidence." Then she clicked to a slide tying procurement irregularities to my credentials. My stomach dropped. Theo stood. "Before discussion continues, counsel requests evidentiary review." Vanessa smiled thinly. "Of course." That was Julian's cue. He nodded to IT, and the screen changed. Not to my access logs, to version history. July 18th, 11:42 p.m. Redline edits on crisis memo inserting Ms. Morales exposure pathway. Author credentials, V. Hale executive account. Then badge scans from restricted finance copy room. Then invoice overlays showing original vendor routing numbers versus altered versions. Then calendar metadata proving spoofed invites from an admin terminal under ops control. Theo narrated dates and plain language implications like he was building a bridge no one could claim not to understand. Vanessa's mask slipped for the first time when the hotline transcript appeared. "This is procedural theater," she snapped. "A selective dump orchestrated by a compromised CEO protecting his wife." Julian didn't raise his voice. "Then explain why the shell vendor receiving funds links to Hale Strategic Holdings." Silence. Silence. Theo placed records on the table. State filing. Beneficial owner trail. Transfers timed before merger disclosures. She'd been siphoning money to cover a side fund leveraged against a drop in Crossvale valuation. Tank the merger, trigger the vote, profit, and blame us. Julian looked at the board and said what he'd hidden. "I chose Ava because 6 months ago she reported an error that would have inflated revenue and made me look better. She knew it could cost her promotion." Every eye turned to me as security entered the room. The fallout started before the gala music even cut off. Security escorted Vanessa out through a side corridor while donors pretended not to stare and stared. Theo moved like a machine, preservation notices, regulator council, emergency board minutes, external statements drafted in plain language. The merger didn't collapse that night, but it paused. My price came due too. By Monday, my name was everywhere in the wrong order. Employee wife, access logs, fraud probe, executive conflict. Even with proof my credentials were manipulated, the internet had already chosen a simpler story. I took 3 days off. I couldn't answer one more, slept your way into compliance message. Julian came to my mother's hospital cafeteria, not the penthouse, not the office. Neutral ground. He looked wrecked and weirdly human in a plain coat. No assistant. No armor. I owe you an apology that isn't strategic, he said. I folded my coffee sleeve tighter. Try. I asked for your trust while withholding information that directly affected your risk. I told myself I was protecting the investigation. I was also protecting control. That was unfair to you, and it put you at risk. You were right to be angry. Specific. No excuses. It landed. He kept going. I've recused myself from any employment decisions involving you. If you return, it will be under board-approved reporting outside my chain. If you leave, the exit compensation stands, plus an indemnity rider Theo drafted. No NDA about unlawful conduct. I blinked. You're offering me a way out. I'm offering you a choice I should have protected better from the start. I looked at him for a long time. I wanted to step toward him and slap him and ask if he'd eaten. I did none of those things. The marriage contract ends on schedule, I said. No extensions for optics. He nodded once. Understood. And if there is anything real between us, it doesn't survive on paperwork. His throat moved like he swallowed something sharp. Understood. When he left, he set an envelope on the table. Inside was proof my mom's hospital balance had been cleared through the legal rider, not a personal favor. At the bottom was a handwritten note. No debts between us. I still didn't know if that made it easier or harder. The contract ended on a rainy Thursday with no cameras, no statement, and no dramatic speech. I moved out of the penthouse into a smaller apartment 5 blocks from the hospital and 2 train stops from work. Yes, I went back to Crossvale, under a new reporting line to an operations audit team the board created after the fraud mess. Less glamour, more spreadsheets, which honestly felt like oxygen. Theo called it institutional learning. Mari called it, you finally getting paid to be suspicious. Mom's treatment schedule stabilized. The insurance rider bridged the worst months, and after the investigation, Crossvale expanded hardship review policy because the board suddenly discovered employees have lives. Funny how scandal can teach empathy. Julian and I did not slide into a movie ending. We signed the termination papers. We kept distance. We exchanged exactly 1 work-related email and 2 painfully polite texts about documents. I missed him anyway, which annoyed me on principle. 3 weeks later, I found him in the hospital cafeteria line holding burnt coffee and looking like he'd come straight from a 12-hour meeting. He didn't approach until I nodded. No contracts, he said. No board votes, I replied. No leverage. I studied his face. Why are you here? He glanced toward oncology. Theo said your mom had a good scan. I was already in the area meeting council. I wanted to say I'm glad. It was so simple I almost cried, which I refused to do in front of the soup station. We sat for 10 minutes and talked about nothing important. Parking rates, terrible coffee, Mari's ongoing hatred of him. When I stood to leave, he didn't ask for anything. He just said, if you ever want dinner with no agenda, I'd like that. A real invitation. No clause. No deadline. I said maybe. Ask me again when you can handle being told no. He smiled, small, tired, real. I can. So here's what I learned. Power can buy silence, optics, even temporary safety, but it cannot build trust on its own. Self-respect is expensive. Love is riskier than contracts. And if someone wants your heart, they should come without legal language.